purpose. Now you're talking down on my name on purpose. And you don't feel no way. You think I deserve.
What's up, y'all? I'm J.Max. Welcome back to my channel. This is J.Max Reax, and tonight I'm watching a requested video by The Grooves that says why Mariah Carey was snubbed at the 1996 Grammys. I love The Grooves channel. I typically watch their stuff off film, so let's see what they have to say about Mariah Carey.
Imagine being a recording artist and having virtually everything one could dream of. A hugely successful music career, legions of fans all over the world, singles and albums selling like hotcakes, and an incredible voice that was only matched by your breathtaking beauty. This was a rather accurate description of Mariah Carey in the mid-90s. The highly anticipated release of her album Daydream would cement her status as one of the most successful artists of the decade thanks to record-breaking hit songs, which earned her 6 nominations at the 1996 Grammys. While everyone expected her to win,
but I know you gotta go for your performance, and I know you're gonna win a lot tonight.
Many were shocked to learn that she hadn't won a single award by the end of the ceremony.
Wow.
So why didn't Mariah Carey receive anything for what was her most critically acclaimed album to date? In 1995, Mariah Carey was one of the biggest names in mainstream pop music. By the year 1994, she had already released 4 hit records, including the widely successful Music Box in 1993. From the release of her debut album in 1990, she had crafted a mostly pop sound with some influences from R&B and hip-hop. Her 5th studio album, Daydream, was different in that it leaned more heavily towards urban music. Mariah Carey had greater influence over the musical direction and composition of the album than on previous projects, and in retrospect, many view the album as the start of her creative and vocal transformation, which became more apparent on her 6th studio album, Butterfly. During the recording of the album, she had several creative disagreements with her label and then-husband, Tommy Mottola, partly because she was willing to break the Adele contemporary formula her label had adopted at the beginning of her career, and sought to collaborate with more urban artists, including Jermaine Dupri, Babyface, and Boyz II Men. With Walter Afanasieff's assistance and the addition of a few contemporary producers, she was able to produce a mostly pop record while making a solo transition into the contemporary R&B market. Daydream debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200, and 6 singles were released from the album. Its lead single, Fantasy, became the first single by a female artist to debut at number 1 on the US Billboard Hot 100. It went on to top the chart for 8 weeks and became the 2nd best-selling single of 1995 in the US. The second single, One Sweet Day, topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 16 weeks and became the longest-running number 1 single in Billboard history, holding the record for 23 years. Jointly, the singles from Daydream spent a combined 6 months at the top of the Hot 100. The album received mostly positive reviews and became Mariah Carey's best tribute album to date, with critics complimenting the album's production, sound quality, and Mariah Carey's creative growth as a songwriter and vocalist. The Los Angeles Times even saw Daydream as the record that would finally silence her detractors, whereas the New York Times praised her lyrics. But even though many critics acknowledged the quality of her writing, many of them, particularly rock critics, did not view Daydream as a memorable or impactful record. That dismissal was not a matter of quality, but rather a matter of taste. Ken Tucker for Entertainment Weekly, quote, "At her best, Carey is a disco diva of the 90s, a worthy successor of trailblazing women like Donna Summer and Vicki Sue Robinson, R&B singers with an affinity for the endless groove. Disco? No wonder most rock critics can't get behind her." Party on, Mariah. Stephen Holden for the New York Times, "Voluptuously romantic makeup music is rarely taken seriously unless there is a cynical message buried inside it. That's why it would be easy to dismiss Mariah Carey's subtly innovative new album Daydream, whose best cuts bring pop candy making to a new peak of textural refinement."
Wow.
End quote. While they acknowledged that she had evolved as an artist, some critics still perceived Mariah Carey as remaining in a commercial pop mold. In the midst of the booming creativity of the 90s, other genres of music would come to flourish that same year and arouse more interest among critics. The 1990s saw major shifts take place in the music industry. After a wave of mergers and acquisitions starting in the mid-80s, the field became dominated by huge media corporations that threatened to absorb and/or obliterate independent labels. Expansion and consolidation would come to affect music across the board, causing a concentration of wealth and attention on a select group of megastars and a growing tension between commercial and creative imperatives. As they were burdened with the cost of conglomeration, music corporations were inherently conservative and preferred to seek new sources of revenue from existing assets rather than take risks on untested material. That hesitancy was also visible at the Grammys, which struggled to adapt to a swiftly changing music landscape and had a tendency to mostly reward pop music acts in its most prestigious categories. 1995 is a particularly interesting year because it saw both the success of megastars making music driven by commercial imperatives and the rise of a new wave of artists creating alternative forms of music. 4 records, Michael Jackson's You Are Not Alone, Mariah Carey's Fantasy, Whitney Houston's Exhale, and One Sweet Day debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, the most for any year in Billboard history until 2020, which had no less than 10 singles debut at number 1. The year had plenty of hit singles: Coolio's Gangsta's Paradise, Shaggy's Bombastic, and Method Man and Mary J. Blige's I'll Be There For You. Alternative acts had major releases, notably Bjork, who released Post. Gangsta rap triumphed with Tupac scoring a number 1 album, Me Against the World, While in Prison, and rock music was doing very well too, as Hootie and the Blowfish scored the best-selling album of the year. But 1995 would have looked much different without the release of Alanis Morissette's groundbreaking album, A Jagged Little Pill. Though she was initially rejected by all major labels, a representative from the relatively new label Maverick Records, co-founded by Madonna, eventually got in touch with her. With the support of Maverick behind her, Jagged Little Pill became her first internationally released album. Writing Jagged Little Pill was cathartic for Alanis Morissette, who finally found herself able to express her coming of age through mature imagery, adventurous lyrics, and less conventional sounds, resulting in a chaotic yet authentic representation of her life at the time that earned her the respect of rock lovers and turned her into an overnight star. Praised by critics and fans alike, the album topped the Billboard Hot 200 and helped define the alternative rock sound that emerged in the mid-90s. Yet, some music specialists did not expect the diversity of the year in 1995 to be reflected in the outcome of the 1996 Grammys, given the dominance of pop acts at the award show over the past couple of years. Predictions were mostly along the lines of, if the Grammys are truly about rewarding excellence and innovation in the field of music, then they will reward innovative artists. But they're actually not, so pop artists will probably win. Virtually everyone, including journalists, critics, and other artists, expected Mariah Carey's Daydream to win multiple awards at the 38th Grammys. But that was before the Board of Governors decided to change some crucial rules. In the mid-90s, Grammy bashing had become a practice in which quite a lot of music journalists were involved. In fact, despite the explosion of creativity that marked the beginning of the decade, the Grammy Awards kept heavily rewarding pop music over newer, more alternative genres in the major categories. As a result, a growing number of professionals working in the music industry started to question the show's relevance. Then came the 1995 show, with a slate of nominees so mainstream that several industry executives publicly criticized the awards. Tommy Mottola, who was president of Sony Music and Mariah Carey's manager and husband at the time, was among those who dismissed the Grammys for failing to reflect what was happening in contemporary music. According to Michael Green, who was president of the Academy, the problem stemmed from the size and breadth of the Academy's membership, which was made up of almost 8,000 musicians, producers, executives, and others in the recording industry. The Board of Governors therefore decided to create a panel of 25 Academy members who met in New York and listened to the top 20 vote-getters in each of the 4 major categories, and then voted by secret ballot. It was this vote, not the vote of the entire membership, that determined the final nominees in each of the 4 major categories. Some detractors argued that having such a small number of members choose the final nominees would actually have the opposite effect, and favor mainstream artists. Author Thomas O'Neill declared, quote, "All that's going to happen is that the nominations in these 4 categories will become more hip. If Mariah Carey wins, as I'm sure she will, for Record of the Year and Album of the Year, it will mean that the same kind of traditional, mellow-sounding, mega-selling nominee will win again." End quote. The nominations were eventually announced, and Mariah Carey and Alanis Morissette tied for most nominations with 6 each. Mariah Carey was specifically nominated in 2 general categories, Album of the Year and Record of the Year, and 4 genre-specific categories, Best Pop Collaboration with Vocals, Best Pop Vocal Album, Best Female Pop Vocal Performance, and Best Female R&B Vocal Performance. One of the main things to take away from the overall list of winners that night is that it was somewhat reflective of the diversity of music that was released in 1995.
But it is diverse.
Grammy winners ranged from distinguished musical veterans including Frank Sinatra, who won his first competitive award since 1966, to edgier acts like Nine Inch Nails and Nirvana, and that predominance of artists who were perceived either as new and edgy or as music veterans made sense given the public outcry against the dominance of current pop music at the Grammys. In fact, pop artists were surprisingly challenged by rock artists, not only in the big 4 categories, but also in pop, partly as a result of the new selection procedure established by the Board of Governors and a new voting trend in favor of edgy artists. For instance, Hootie and the Blowfish, the folk rock band whose first major label album had sold 12 million copies, won 2 awards, one in a general category, Best New Artist, and another in a pop category, Best Pop Performance by a duo or group with vocal. But nowhere was the tension between adult contemporary and rock better exemplified than in the Album of the Year category. The nominees were Mariah Carey, Michael Jackson, Alanis Morissette, Pearl Jam, and Joan Osborne. The 2 albums by Mariah Carey and Alanis Morissette were perceived by critics as 2 polar opposites. Mariah's record was released by a major label, Alanis's was released by a smaller and relatively new one. Daydream was dreamy, Jagged Little Pill was cathartic. Mariah's execution seemed controlled and graceful, Alanis's seemed spontaneous and carefree. But in light of the Grammys' resolute endeavor to favor artistic excellence over commercial performance, Alanis had an edge, especially given that the very notion of excellence that critics sought to promote had become more synonymous with alternative rock than pop music. Critics for the Los Angeles Times wrote, quote, "The Carey and Jackson albums perfectly fit the stodgy old Grammy idea of excellence. They are highly polished spectacles that try so hard to embrace all the safe commercial dictates of the moment that you can almost hear the artist say to the consumer at the end of each package, 'Didn't I give you everything you wanted?'" To varying degrees, the Morissette, Osborne, and Pearl Jam albums live up to a more enduring standard of excellence. They move beyond superficial pop surfaces with music and commentary that are more daring, more insightful, and ultimately more purposeful. End quote. While Mariah Carey was viewed as the favorite ahead of the ceremony, Alanis Morissette ended up winning the top award of the night. In the Record of the Year category, the voters could either go the conventional route by picking a ballad or be unconventional and reward rock or urban music. Seal's Kiss from a Rose was the only pick that let voters have it both ways, a ballad but by a quote-unquote edgy act, and it won. In the R&B female category, Mariah Carey was disadvantaged by the fact that she was seen as a pop/R&B singer facing quote-unquote pure R&B artists. Given that voters were exclusively R&B artists themselves, it made more sense to go for an artist exclusively established within that genre instead of a crossover artist. The 3 favorites were Brandy, Anita Baker, and Toni Braxton. Anita Baker won. Her losses in other categories seem more difficult to explain. For Best Pop Collaboration with Vocals, she lost to The Chieftains and Van Morrison. For Best Pop Vocal Album, Daydream lost to Turbulent Indigo by Joni Mitchell. And for Best Female Pop Vocal Performance, she lost to Annie Lennox. In fact, some of those wins were very unexpected, so much so that neither Joni Mitchell nor Annie Lennox had prepared a speech.
Oh, gee, I don't know what to say. I really didn't expect this, Klein. You got it.
I really never expected to win this. I sincerely mean it.
I can't believe I've won one of these things.
Wow.
But if we consider the artists Mariah Carey lost to, all of them could be classified either as a quote-unquote edgy rookie or a music veteran, two types of artists that were favored by voters that year. Alanis Morissette and Seal both released their first studio albums in the early 90s and received praise for the originality of their music while enjoying mainstream commercial success, while Joni Mitchell, Annie Lennox, Van Morrison, and Anita Baker were all recognizable music veterans with at least 15 years of career under their belt at the time. 1995 was an incredible year for adult contemporary music on the charts, but 1996 was not the best year for mainstream music artists at the Grammys. Madonna and Michael Jackson, who also received a nomination, didn't win in pop or general categories either. And it might stem from the fact that many key actors had an interest in seeing adult contemporary artists like Mariah Carey lose. The Grammys Board of Governors sought to maintain the show's relevance by implementing reforms. Had Mariah Carey won in the general field, their detractors would have claimed that the reform of the voting process was pointless. Music labels as well as voters demanded a more diverse pool of nominees, and seeing Mariah Carey win would have probably not reflected the change they sought to make happen. And critics had expressed disappointment with the outcome of the Grammys for several years and wanted the pool of winners to reflect their own idea of excellence. In the end, Mariah Carey was snubbed, probably not because of who she was, not even because of the music she made, but rather because of what she represented. 1995 was a great year for music and Mariah Carey. She was at the peak of her career, was hugely successful commercially, and had demonstrated considerable growth as an artist. But the deliberate attempt to favor alternative forms of music at the 1996 Grammys likely played against her, as the tension between the interests of major conglomerates that made conservative artistic decisions and those of a new wave of artists seeking to take more risk grew throughout the decade, voting trends started to shift. In the end, the big winners of the night were edgy artists who sold a lot of records, namely artists who had managed to overcome the tension between commercial and creative imperatives the industry was facing at the time. Seal and Alanis Morissette.
So that was really, really good. Shout out to the recommendation or suggestion for this one. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best way to respond to what they said because it was so much to unpack. And I guess the biggest thing I see in this one is that was just a really great time for music. I think every blue moon or every, however many years or so, we do see the Grammys kind of award more creative artists and more people that are maybe not as seen or maybe not as respected in the industry. And I think that's okay. I don't love that maybe sometimes it's as a result of pressure and not as a result of people really putting out substantive music that the world has voted for, that, the Academy sees as something great. But I do agree in this instance, I think maybe, pressure, changing of times might have forced their hand in not giving Mariah Carey a Grammy here. But I also look at the people in the categories that she's with. She has some stiff competition. So, when you look at it from an artistic and creative standpoint, if they're judging it based on those parameters and those different types of criteria, you have to just say, maybe her album wasn't as creative at the time. And y'all know, I've told y'all in the past, I'm not a huge Mariah Carey fan. I don't listen to a lot of Mariah Carey music, so I can't really speak to the quality and depth of her albums in terms of like them saying it was more pop or it was more generic and mainstream. Same with Whitney and same with Michael. I don't really just go listen to their music like that. I didn't as a kid. When this happened, I was 3 years old. So I can only speak from a stance of what they put in the video and what I do know of these artists' music at that time. I also look at it and I'm just like, yo, they just had some stiff competition. They did, be it the alternative category, the rock category, the R&B soul. Music in the 90s is still so impactful and influential today that it makes sense that, they probably had a hard time, selecting people for these awards back then. Yeah, I can't even really give you much of a response to that one. I do hate it though, because I'm sure based on the turn and the transition of her musical style and her being able to write and do things more creatively in her own right, it probably felt like a deserved moment for her and she didn't get it. But then when I look up and I see that Michael didn't get it either, I'm like, okay, you know, they just went a different direction. It makes me think of some of the uproar a few years back when Alessia Cara won a Grammy for her album. I think it was over somebody else that was huge at the time, and they were like, how the fuck did she get a Grammy? And people like me who listen to alternative music and music that's not as, you know, generic and on the charts, I said to myself, she deserves that. The album was incredible. It was impactful, it was empowering for young girls, and it just had a message to it. It was different. And other people were like, huh? But this also makes me think about a Don Angelo video that I watched. I'll make sure I link it above, where he said artists without Grammys are not anything, and it was a misleading title where he just discussed how the Grammys in this day and age have become more of a joke. And I can't agree more with that. You know, there are people that are killing it indie and in the alternative circuit that should just be winning awards based on the creativity, but of course they're not pushed down our throats. They're not top 40, they're not top anything. They're just, you know, Spotify weekly discovery, and if you know about them, you know about them. If you don't, you don't. And that sucks, because there are some really incredible artists out there that get overshadowed by I don't want to say terrible music, because I like what's mainstream too, but I think it's just different. It's commercially successful. It's the machine pumping, you know, a lot of promotion behind it, and then you have those with little budgets that do big, great things, and they just don't get the nods and the notice that they should get. Yeah. Definitely a long, drawn out answer from me, but there's not much I can say. I think this covered it. As I've told y'all before, I love the Grooves channel. I just never film when I watch the content, because it's either really, really long, or I'm just like intrigued by it. It's something I watch before I go to sleep at night. But shout out to the recommendation for this. Y'all know I love a good music documentary. I love dissecting things and theorizing what's going on. It's not, you know, I'm not a music expert. I can only give you my thoughts and opinions about it. I could be reaching, put my disclaimers out there before y'all come at me left. But let me know your thoughts about this below. Comment, like, subscribe. Until next time. Peace.